Hey everybody, good evening. Happy Tuesday. Today is March 24th. I'm a little bit dark here. Let's fix that. And thank you all so much for being here. Thanks for being a part of my world. Thanks for being a part of my channel. Thanks for being such an encouragement. And tonight we're going to talk about a topic. We'll dive in a few minutes to give people time, of course, but as we always do. But a topic that I think is worth thinking about. It's how did the Christian obsession with suffering affect you? So again, we'll give everybody a minute or two to jump into the live stream here, but that's what our topic will be tonight. And I'll give a bit of an intro to that shortly. But I hope that this helps. I'm going to explain it in a little bit more detail before we jump in. And I really do hope that it can be just a part of the healing process of thinking through what happened to us. That's what this is in many ways about. So I hope you're doing well. I've been at times trying to do what I do with my guests, which is often to ask them to come up with something quirky about themselves. And I've had a whole bunch of things like that I have shared over the years, just little by little. And I was trying to think of something to share for myself, recently. But somebody asked me on one of my live streams, and I don't think many people saw it, so I thought I'd kind of repeat it. But some people said that occasionally I talk about my coffee and that I really, 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 really like my coffee, and that they were just curious how I drink it. And so I thought I would just share that for kicks. What I do, and I don't do this every day. Sometimes I just do nothing. Sometimes I do hot tea, like hot green tea or something. But when I do my coffee, the thing I like to do is a really nice latte. So what I'll do is I'll do whole milk, and I'll put in like a little vanilla flavor, a little caramel flavor. I'll put in a little bit of the sugar. It's called not real sugar. It's allulose, which is like a plant-based sugar that's better for you. And I'll put in a little bit of cocoa powder, and I'll put in a little bit of that mushroom coffee stuff that's supposedly good for you. I don't like the taste of it, but just put a little bit since it's supposed to be healthy. And then, of course, the coffee, I'll do the French press, which is I just do like a dark roast coffee, a French roast coffee with a little bit of caramel flavor in it. And then, just make the coffee, and then make the latte, and put it all together, maybe with a little whipped cream or caramel drizzle on top. But that's my quirkiness. I love my coffee. I don't do it every day, but when I do it, I try to do it nicely. I like to sort of make it into an art. So anyway, tonight is going to be a time when we can have anybody that wants to jump in. I'm going to put the StreamYard link in. And again, we're just a couple minutes in here, so we'll hopefully have some more people join soon. But I did just want to start by sort of diving into the topic. The question is, how did the Christian obsession with suffering affect you? And I think maybe one of the places to start is to just make sure we're clear about what we're talking about, and make sure that when I say that, you can say, yeah, I know what you mean, that is actually what happened. So for a lot of us, I think you could make the argument that Christianity really does treat suffering, our suffering. Now, I'm not talking yet about the suffering of Christ. I'm talking about just our suffering as humans, that we would treat it as something very necessary and as something spiritually impressive, and that it was sort of proof that God was doing something important. That if you weren't being severely disciplined by God in some way, where he was being able to craft you and mold you, just like you might have the potter pushing the clay around and smushing it, he might need to smush you. Or the way they would talk about frankincense, and there's a frankincense and myrrh, one of them or both of them, but I think frankincense, you have to crush it to get to the really sweet smell, which is true of a lot of spices. And we would hear these illustrations of when gold is refined, it you have to heat it up to get it to separate from the dross on the top, so you can skim it off and have pure gold left. And there was an illustration we heard a lot when I was younger. I don't know if it's truly accurate or not, but it's just what they said. But a shepherd, they said, would intentionally break some of its sheep's legs if the sheep just constantly wandered away. And the sheep at that point, maybe not all of its legs, but one of them, the sheep couldn't walk away, and the shepherd would have to carry it. And so for the next month, while the sheep's leg got better, the sheep would just literally be draped around the shepherd's shoulders. And when the sheep was finally fine again, and the shepherd was able to put it back down, it could stand on its own 2 feet. It was so used to being around the shepherd that it would just naturally not stray anymore. It would stay near the shepherd's voice. That was its new home, its new mindset. And there were a lot of injunctions as well to suffering that often related to your witness for Christ that might and almost hopefully would end up in martyrdom. For a lot of us, we were told there's a day coming, and it's probably going to come from the Russians, but a day's coming when the Russians are going to storm in with their guns, and they're going to put a little, picture of Jesus on the floor and say, "Spit on it, or we're going to kill you." What are you going to do? And that was sort of the proof that we were looking for, that we're really in the will of God, that we're really serious, and that God's doing something in us. And there was always these martyrdom stories that were sort of seen as the pinnacle of, like, if you could have an experience like that, man, could God use you so mightily. God could use you so mightily if you're willing to be suffering to the point that you're willing to literally give up your life. And that was seen as, a big, big, big deal. I would like to argue that we are in that process. When we go through that, we are romanticizing suffering. We are romanticizing it. And I'm going to explain that in more detail here. And again, eventually, if some of this rings a bell with some people and they want to share some thoughts, we can certainly have you come on an audio, video, or both. But a few people joined in here with the chat. Dark Side, thanks so much for being here. Good to see you. Tinky Karana, hello. I don't think I've seen your handle before, so if this is your first time, welcome. If not, if I'm just forgetting, welcome again. Hey, Shell, thank you so much. By the way, I know people email me all the time. Some days just get the better of me. I just don't have all the time I need to respond to everybody. So please don't, anyone that has written to me and has not heard back from me, please know that it's on my radar to get, right there. But this is, we are on a week on, week off schedule, and this is my week with the kids. And so it's just, it's nonstop everything. Everything's all go. 4 little kids, age 11 and under, the loves of my life, but it's a lot. So great to see you, Phil. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate that very much. And tonight's topic, again, that we just touched the tip of the iceberg with, is how we were taught as Christians to romanticize suffering. And I'll, again, invite you all to jump in here in about 5 minutes. But we were taught, of course, that suffering is going to make you godly and obedient. It's going to make you humble. It's going to make you mature. It's going to keep your eyes on Him. It's going to make you useful. And I think a lot of us, as we grew up with these messages, would say that we were taught to believe that if you said something like, "This hurts," or "This hurts too much," or "This is wrong," or "I don't deserve this," or "I deserve self-care," that could almost be seen as a point of weakness, selfishness, faithlessness, even that you're basically trying to have a cushy life. And I'm going to talk in a minute about why I think a lot of us felt like that was so wrong. But even abuse would come up, and I think a lot of us could probably tell these stories where, at least in a generation ago, there were a lot of marriages where somebody was abusing the other person, and they said, "You need to stay," to exemplify what it means to endure all things, to love all things. And they used that illustration or that parallel of saying, God forgave you this much. How can you not forgive someone else this minuscule amount? And therefore you need to just go through this suffering, because this is part of your witness, to suffer graciously, to be under fire, and to have so much joy of the Lord just oozing out of you. For me, especially, a lot of this was wrapped up in missions. People like, just so many people. Of course, the earliest one for me was Hudson Taylor. When I was a kid, that story had some intense suffering in it at times. But also Jim Elliot, going out to the tribes. He is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. Famous quote from Jim Elliot. He is no fool to give up what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. And the idea is your suffering is almost a path to get more. Almost like if you really think you want to be selfish, then fine, be selfish, but understand the rules with God are upside down, they're backwards, and they're beautiful. If you want to gain everything, then give up everything. What does it gain a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? But if you want to gain everything, gain your soul and you get the world too. So suffer. You'll be paid back. Just like Job, you'll be paid back double. And when you get that in your head for a very long time, and you start to get suspicious of things like compromise, of course, but even just peace and quiet days and a little bit of wanting that easy road. I've been through enough. Now it's time for a season of rest. You almost feel like you're being worldly or compromising. And some of these things that we've been talking about can be so incredibly difficult and even brutal to understand and to untangle, because it gets into, again, the deep recesses of your worldview architecture, in a sense. And it's just there. It's at the deepest levels of who you are. And again, for anyone just joining, we're going to be opening up the floor in a second to anyone that wants to join us in the studio to talk, either on audio or video or both. But I just want to sort of flesh out an intro here. I think we were by and large, in this theology that said agony is a noble thing. Agony is a noble thing. And therefore, if you need to stay in an abusive marriage and not consider separation or divorce, it's a good thing because God is being glorified by your suffering. And to us, it felt like this is one of the clearest ways to say, I am serious about following Jesus. Suffering was central to Christianity because it all comes back, of course, to Jesus and the cross. And if suffering is central to Christ's story, which of course it is, his passion, his torture and death, violent death, if it's at the top of the whole universe's story, really, it's the crux of it all, then why would not your life also have that at the crux of it? Carry your cross, deny yourself, follow him into the pain, endure it, graciously submit, bleed like Christ did, plead quietly. And suffering, we were sort of taught, was something you don't say, oh, this is unfortunate, this is really sad, I'm so grieved that I'm going through this. You'd almost feel like it's a sacred gift to go through suffering because, again, it's a clear sign that you're following Christ. And you would almost get the sense, I remember hearing a lot, that you want to be so serious about your walk with Christ that when you wake up and get all out of bed and your feet hit the floor, that at the moment your feet hit the floor, the devil and the demons are like, oh shoot, that person's awake again. So Tim's awake again. It looks like it's going to be, back to the battle and he's going to try to make spiritual advancements for the kingdom. And of course they would try to fight you. And so it was like, if you're going to be serious about following Jesus, you have to be serious about spiritual warfare as well as about suffering. And this completely, in my opinion, warped our relationship with pain. And instead of saying, is this situation healthy? Is it mature? Is it balanced? Is it toxic? The only real question you're asking yourself is this helping me to progress in my holiness and in my witness for Christ? You don't care if it's crushing you. You just wonder, am I becoming more godly? Am I focused on the pain and on the pain giver? Not the divine pain giver, just the human pain giver and the situation. Am I focused on the current events, on the cancer, on the abuser? Or am I focused on the God to whom I will direct everyone who asks me, how can you endure this suffering with joy? I can endure it because of Christ. That's why. And it gets so dangerous. The cross, of course, is a symbol that becomes the template for your whole life. And, everything becomes suffering, and all the ins and outs of life that are hard for you, it all becomes so spiritually important and meaningful. Pain can't just be pain. It's never just pain. It's a test. It's a refiner's fire. It's God's will. It's sort of the harm that you're going through. You don't need to see it as harm. You just see it as a lesson and extract from it something that you can use to get closer to God. Endure it first, ask questions later, and you end up with a very deep confusion between your spiritual growth and the injury and the pain and the abuse and the toxicity. So I've got a lot more I want to talk about, but I just wanted to use that as a bit of an intro, and I'll share more thoughts on that based on how many people do or don't come in the live chat. And I'm very, very glad to keep talking. As you know, I don't have a problem with coming up with words, but maybe I should sometimes, but I don't. Mark Bradford, Mark from Hill, Michigan. Hello. Thank you so much, Mark, for being here. Really appreciate it. Also, animals should not bear suffering for us. Are you vegan? I'm not vegan. No, I'm not. And I'm not going to get into that topic tonight, though I don't want to get off topic. But thank you for the question. Fiery unbeliever, the overarching point of it is that we're required to prove ourselves and our devotion to other human beings and subsequently God, but it's more than anyone can actually give. Yeah, very well said. This is proving yourself, proving your walk with Christ, proving that you're truly, like, if you're like, I'll just say it this way. I remember watching Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ, that movie, and thinking to myself when I first saw it, like, I didn't like the weirdness of that, whatever that person, that weirdo was who had the little man baby that they carried on. But apart from that, like, I really enjoyed that movie. And I thought to myself, I need to watch this on a regular basis and at least watch the scenes where he is tortured. Not because it was comfortable or I liked it, of course. It was disgusting and horrible, but to say, look what he did for me. Look what he did for me. Excuse me. Look what Christ did for me. How can you possibly do anything other than keep your eyes focused on that? He did that to buy you from sin and death. And he is your example. Jesus in the garden talks to the disciples. Can't you tarry for 1 hour and pray? I mean, yeah, that's not even suffering. That's just like a little bit of self-discipline. Can't you do something? I'm over here sweating drops of blood. Of course, they don't tell us that there were stories of Zeus sweating tears of blood and water already that everyone knew about. But, in the Jesus story, when they made it up, Jesus now sweats, or cries tears of blood and water. And it's just, can't you do the same thing? Look, I mean, he suffered like mountaintops worth, and you have this little teeny, block of suffering. There's no comparison, but do your little bit, and knowing that he took on the weight of the world. He took on the sin of every human being who ever lived from time beginning to time end. Every person who ever sinned, their punishment is piled on top of you. And of course, if you're a Calvinist, you'd have some clarifications to that. He did die for everyone in the invitation, but of course he died only for the elect in the truest sense. But as if we really care now about that. But it is fascinating to think about. But we loved it. We absolutely loved it. We loved that picture, and it made us, especially when you saw it from an early time in your life, you got convinced that this is what I'm supposed to think about, and at least be willing to do. Maybe I don't want to pursue suffering on purpose. Hopefully some of us were smart enough to not go, try to invite trouble. But we were like, if trouble finds us, I'll do my best to glorify God through it, and I will not run from it. I will not hide. And yeah, there's a lot I'm going to unpack here in a little bit as I'm going to check and see if anyone wants to jump in. But if not, I've got quite a few things I'm going to unpack about this, and I hope what I say is helpful. Ryan Scott, thank you so much for your super chat. I'm sorry, I will admit I don't know what currency that is. I am exposing my ignorance, and I'm sorry. I don't know what currency that is. I should know, but I don't. But whatever currency it is, thank you for your super chat. I really appreciate it. I've consumed your content for a while. We have similar backgrounds, and your channel has helped me process what I've gone through with my fundamentalist Christian family. I hope this helps. Thank you so very much. I appreciate your support and encouragement. Okay, it's yen. Okay, yen. I did guess that first, then I thought, no, maybe it's not. But thank you so very much, Ryan. I appreciate that. Ryan, by the way, I've been saying this a lot on my live streams, but just based on us having similar backgrounds, if you are interested at all, if you've not already done this, we may be in contact, and I just dropped the ball. But if we haven't been in contact yet, please do reach out. And this for Ryan and anybody. Reach out to me if you can on Facebook. That's my preference. My handle is Harmonic Tim, and that's my personal page. I'd love to have you added as a friend, and then reach out to me on Messenger. Let me know we talked here, and just let me know if you're ready for an interview. If it's not the right time now, please jump in, whenever it is, if it's in a month or 6 months. Love to have you on. So thank you, Ryan. I really appreciate your support so much. And again, if anybody wants to join the live stream, you're welcome. If no pressure, though, got plenty to work through and talk through and have a good time here either way. James says, Jesus took on all our sins, but nothing has changed for us. Odd. Adam's sin seems more consequential. Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. I often thought, and this is a silly side part of what you just said, James, but I often thought to myself, if the first thing that ever happens when sin enters the world is we get clothes, then when Christ comes and fixes our sin problem, do we all get naked again? Like, why doesn't that happen? I know it's just so silly to say, but I thought that's like the first visible sign of the curse. So what should be the most visible sign the curse is gone? Just reverse it. Get your clothes off, But anyway, I'm sure some of us, when we leave the curse of Christianity, that happens anyway. We get our clothes off a lot more at that point. But Ryan says, I don't use Facebook on principle. No worries. I'm not opposed to an interview, though. I'll add another way to reach out here. If you haven't already, my apologies for anyone that has reached out. I've got a slew of emails to catch up on, but it's on my radar to catch up ASAP. So here's my email for anyone, and I'd love to have you on. And that goes for Ryan as well as anyone else. But thank you so much, Ryan. I'd love to check in with you when you're ready. So again, if anybody wants to join us, you're welcome to. But I wanted to talk through again this suffering concept. I think we're not everybody, and you always have to be careful. You don't want to say these blanket statements and say we all felt this way. You never know. But I think for a lot of us, we felt like endurance was the most important thing. Like you're not supposed to focus on being honest in the sense of like being open about how much it hurts. You're supposed to hang on. You're supposed to hang on and endure to the end. That was like holier than coming out and telling your story of all you've been through. If you come out and say, "Oh, I've been through so much. I've been through the ringer. This is awful." It was almost like, well, that's your reward. You were going to get a reward in heaven for suffering, but now you're trying to draw all this attention to yourself. You've gotten your reward, just like those Pharisees that pray in public on the corners. Like you're begging for the reward of everyone's attention, and you're praying on the street corner real loud, and you got everyone's attention. But that's your reward. You don't get one in heaven for that. To be quietly suffering was so admirable. Suffering and struggling in silence was almost evidence that your faith was mature. You are an old soul in Christ, in a sense. And if you were going to set boundaries and call it out and name it, or set limits or step away for your mental health, that was like weakness. Like, why won't you endure for Christ? And people get ashamed for just having normal human limits to say, I can't do this, or I shouldn't do this, or this is unhealthy. And I know people throughout my life, I'm not thinking of anyone in particular, but I know people who should have gotten at least separated from their abusive spouse. And this was more yesteryear, but I know people who said, I can't do it. I won't do it, because for two reasons. Number one, I don't think divorce and even separation honors God. I made a vow till death do us part, and I'm going to keep it. This honors God. But also my reputation in the church, and maybe arguably that's what this was more about for some people. You never know. But like that reputation, the sense of like, man, so-and-so has been through so much, but they did it with so much graciousness for the Lord's sake. And you'd hear these epic stories from time to time. I mean, I truly would hear some of these stories. And it looks like someone just joined here. But I'll be with you in just 1 second. But thank you so much for jumping in. But you'd hear these stories of, I remember one distinctly. I don't remember where I heard it or how it all went, but just sort of given the cliff notes. This lady had an alcoholic husband who'd, waste all his money on booze, and he'd hit her or ignore her or scream at her or just spend his life at the bar. He wasn't much of a husband, and all she did was stay faithful and pray and pray and pray. And then one day, he got his life together and said, what the hell am I doing? I've got a great life and a great wife, and I'm going to stop. And of course, they all attribute it to this long-suffering, prayerful wife. She did this. God did this through her. She was this example, and she brought him basically back to his relationship with the Lord, and then to his family. And could we say in some sense that's a beautiful outcome? Of course, it's a beautiful outcome. Should she have stayed and let an alcoholic man just abuse her and ignore her for years? Absolutely not. Like, he can always come back later and try to make it right, but no, you don't become a doormat. But yet in Christ, you do become a doormat. You do become a doormat. It's really incredible. And abuse and mistreatment gets so hyper spiritualized, and you're told just forgive, 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 even before you've even processed any of it. Just forgive, forgive, forgive. Stay in these painful situations because it's the Christ-like thing to do. And you being harmed is sort of reframed and recast as this is your chance to grow, to keep your eyes on the Lord, to submit, to witness, to carry your cross, and train us as Christians to be available to those who have been hurting us to continue to hurt us. And I'm sorry, but that's some sick ass stuff. But that's what so many of us were taught, by word and by example. But anyway, I'm going to come back to some of this stuff. I've got a few more things to share, but Keith has joined us. I believe it's just audio only, but that's fine either way. And that goes for anybody. No pressure to jump in on the video. But Keith, I'm going to bring you in here and let you kick us off. Keith, can you hear me okay?
Yes. Can you hear me?
I can. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to turn you down just a little bit, but you're good. But yeah, remind us where you're calling from, and then share whatever thoughts you have about tonight's topic.
Oh yeah, I'm calling from Kansas, right in the middle of the country. Man, this one really hits home for me, honestly. Not because of my own suffering necessarily, but because my mother, she had a hell of a life, and it started off for her with being physically and sexually abused as a very young child, and growing up in an oppressive household in a way. And her father was abusive towards her, and I mean towards all of them, but I guess she would kind of get the worst of it, from what I've told. But just her going through all of that in her childhood set her up for a lifetime of anxiety and different disorders that she got diagnosed with, like bipolar and generalized anxiety disorder. And this, got to remember, it was back in the 90s and early 2000s, so there was she kind of was right around the time when there was the opioid epidemic that was caused by doctors overprescribing pain medicine.
Right.
And so her journey just went from one bad thing to the other. And there were good times, like when we were younger, when it was relatively stable and she was happy and everything like that. But then come around, I forget what exact year it was, but I was still fairly young, maybe like in my teens, early teens, mid-teens, when she had we were leaving a restaurant. She was carrying my sister, and she fell down some stairs, and she hit her head. And after that happened to her, because she had to turn, she was holding my sister, she had to turn to protect her, and then in doing that, it hit her back of her head. And so from that point on, her health just spiraled down, and she got very, very sick. And the way she described it was she felt like she got hit by a train. Her whole body hurt just from head to toe, every single part of her. And she would lie in bed in pain, and nobody knew what to do. And, we went to the doctors and stuff. And eventually she got diagnosed with fibromyalgia. And I don't know if you're familiar with that at all.
A little bit.
So it's, for those who don't know, it's a and I'm not up to date on like currently what we know about it, but at least at the time is known as like a muscular disorder. And it's some type of inflammation that basically gets throughout the whole body. And in the muscles specifically, it's like you get really tight, tense muscles, and then there's a tremendous amount of pain that's just like a daily thing. And people with fibromyalgia, essentially you become completely disabled and unable to really function normally. At least she did. And like I said, she just kind of spiraled out down, and was horribly depressed and on 15 different types of medication, and basically just hanging on for survival for much of her life. And how this all kind of ties into the Christian thing is that I remember, and that's not the end of her story either, but that's kind of gives you an idea of like, I saw this and our family saw it and had to deal with it. And it was very tough on us, obviously it was worse for her, but for her family to have to, and her own children, to have to step in and essentially become like, we were sort of like her caretakers, even though she could mostly handle herself, but we were needed for support and emotional support and everything else. So again, back to the Christian thing. So like, I have some family members who, there's this curious thing, like kind of you had mentioned, where they see suffering as almost like this point of, like it's a good thing, because they try to frame it as, oh, well, I remember my aunt saying, talking to my mom, she's like, oh, your life just really reminds me of Job. And she meant it as like a compliment, like, oh, Job went through so much suffering and he, whatever, never lost his faith in God. And despite the fact that my mom was, I never really remember her being like I know she believed maybe something, but I don't know if she actually, because of, she was raised Catholic, and like I mentioned, her childhood was very full of problems. And so I don't know how much she really held to that. But my aunt, I remember being like commending it and saying how good it was, or how trying to just basically, maybe she was trying to do her best to offer some kind of like comfort. But it really was like, this sort of twisted idea that the suffering is a virtue, and that if you suffer in this life, it means that you're just going to get more in heaven or something to that effect. I think
Exactly.
is kind of the idea, so. But for me, like, I just saw no good reason, and endless praying for mom to get well and everything. Nothing ever helped, and then come to find out, like recently I've been, I found this really good YouTube channel who goes, and I forget the name of it right now, or else I would say, but they go over like what severe childhood trauma does to a person and how it affects you physically. And they did this video where they literally almost described every single symptom that my mom had, down to a T, with all these different things. And I was just thinking, like, wow, like, if instead of like praying and offering this like comfort from the Bible or something, if we actually would understand like what happened to a person psychologically and be able to really help them on a real level, like that actually changes them, instead of expecting some kind of miracle to happen. And that's one thing that's been very frustrating to me about specifically in my family, but like with people with problems, it's like, oh, just pray about it. We'll just pray about it. We'll just give it to God in prayer. And it's like, you know, the shit doesn't work, you know, like that's just kind of how because I saw it day after day after day, her suffering and just extreme. And I don't know if I'm getting across like how extreme her experience was, but it was like, apparently it's, you know, she couldn't even get out of bed a lot of times. She would have good days and bad days, but there was almost nothing that she could do that would ever dull the pain or take the pain away other than taking pills, opiates, Lortabs and Percocets and the Xanax for the anxiety. And so this kind of chemical cocktail she was on just kind of added and compounded with a lot of the mental and side effects. So I know I've been kind of rambling along now for a while, but that's kind of where I sit with the suffering. I think it's stupid.
So did she see her suffering as part of her testimony to God a little bit?
You know, like I said, I don't really remember her. She kind of, I think, had some sort of more of like a mystical understanding of God and faith. You know, I don't know. I know I talked to her about God and about Jesus, and I tried, like, back when I was a believer back then, and I would try to, like, but, you know, being your mom, and like, I couldn't really tell her anything. I know she had been witnessed to before, and so I would try to, like, offer what I thought, like, well, Jesus said this, or the Bible says this, or whatever. But you know, she didn't. I think she saw it as more of like, if she was going to take any positive part out of it, it wasn't necessarily about that. It was more about like, I'm tough. I survived this, you know, and that's kind of how she approached it. But I think, honestly, with the amount of pain that I saw her in, yeah, I think she would have done anything to, like, give it up, you know, have it taken away. Right. So yeah. It's just like, it was just so, because when you're younger and you can't do anything, and despite all your prayers and tears and, you know, I think we, you know, kind of coming back to me now, I think I did have her go to my church one time and they laid hands on her. So there were things like that we had done, but I never really ever heard her make a profession of faith. And so actually, after she died, that was one thing, because I was still a believer back then. That was one thing that led me to a lot of internal kind of like dissonance, and not only was I upset that, you know, I lost my mom, but I was like, I don't know if she really believed, and, you know, maybe I didn't witness enough, and all this kind of stuff. And just because of, like, you know, I was thinking about, like, her story and how there are many, 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 many other people on this earth who have a similar story or worse, who didn't even make it past a certain age, as old as she was, or had it even more misery and more pain and more suffering. And you know, how come God be good, right? So it's just like, that's kind of where I was at with that.
Yeah. Well, I'm so sorry. It is a heartbreaking story, and I'm so glad that through all the different experiences you've had, that, you know, that you were able to see through these worldview issues and come to a clear spot for yourself. But that is really heartbreaking that she went through so much. And I think it's, you know, there's so much suffering in this world. I feel like it's already going to find us no matter what we do. But I feel like the hard part is so many Christians almost get real close to inviting it, or at least celebrating it when they get to it. Like, you know, the verse where in the 2 Corinthians, where Paul talks about this thorn in his flesh, and he begs God, take it away, please take it away. And it doesn't happen. Of course, you know, God says no. And then he says, my grace is perfected in your weakness. And in the
Right.
context, you could really say, my grace is perfected in your weakness and your suffering. And Paul says, I will boast of my weakness, because that's when the power of Christ is going to shine through me, or whatever is going to rest in me. And to know that that's what so many people want, is to say, maybe this surface level request, God, I don't want this. But you almost, like, if you get the sense it's going to stay, you start twisting it towards, I'm going to use it to get the sense that this is going to spiritually mature me. And I do wonder sometimes. I've talked before about how I think some Christians do things that betray that they don't really believe what they claim to believe. And sometimes I've wondered with this, and this is all conjecture. I admit it, and you can't look at everybody's heart. So this this could be true for one person, but not the other. But I do wonder at times if some of this stuff is our way as humans of saying, I'm so afraid of suffering. I'm so afraid of suffering alone, that, like that saying goes, misery loves company, and we will do anything to feel less alone in our pain. And that maybe, just maybe, some of us are thinking, I know that the suffering's coming at some point, one way or another, but maybe if I can frame this for myself and for my community, we can frame it together and say, when you go through suffering, if you do it for Christ, it's an admirable, praiseworthy thing, and we will applaud. And this is a good thing, that you can sit there and sort of in a negative sense, have misery have company, but maybe in a positive sense, if you can spin it this way, that it's your way of saying, I could say this is sort of the end of the line. This is the horrible stuff that I feared. It's to come upon me. Oh no, woe is me. But instead, I'm going to sort of pull myself up and do a positive spin, almost like this toxic positivity based on mythology. But I'm going to say, you know what? We all think this is bad. It's not so bad because of God. It's not so bad. The story doesn't end here. And I think that's part of more the whole worldview as a whole, because the biggest suffering that we're afraid of is dying, especially dying through a horrible death, dying something painful and excruciating that leads us to incredible pain for a long time, resulting in finally our death. We're so afraid of that, and so afraid of whatever's next and the nothingness that comes, that we're terrified of it. And that is a suffering we know is coming no matter what we do. There's a lot of suffering we won't have, but that suffering is going to happen one way or another. We're going to suffer and die, all of this. It's guaranteed. And so it's like, even the pinnacle suffering that leads to death, what's the next step that happens? You will be as radiant as the angels, shining and dancing and laughing with joy before the presence of the Lord. Everything turns to glory. Everything.
Right.
You are so glorious because of God, and the biggest the biggest loss leads to the biggest gain. What I counted as loss is actually gain. That passage in Philippians, I think, is where Paul lists out all this stuff. Where he's like, I thought being a Jew and a Pharisee and all this was good. And he says, actually, it held me back. It was a liability, because it held me back from having simple faith in Christ. And the liability versus asset column stuff. But, in a similar sense, like all these liabilities and bad things that happen to you, they are assets, because they're getting you closer to a point where the things of this world fade away, and you're turn your eyes upon Jesus. And suffering for a lot of us did that, or does that, for the Christians that still believe it. And man, oh man, it's so addicting once you get there, because you just think, if I don't think this, then what's left is that suffering is kind of meaningless. Yeah, nihilism. It's kind of meaningless. It's like, I got cancer.
Nihilism.
I got cancer. I got in a car accident. Whatever. I got a cut on my hand. Whatever it is, and you're like, there's no real reason, and it's not. I can certainly be, in a human secular sense, I can be gracious over it, but
you're right. Yeah, I think too that using suffering as a way to say, like, I identify with Christ is a way that it's sort of, suffering is almost fetishized, and that's why you have the ascetics and the monks who would whip themselves, and people who would like Mother Teresa, I've heard, and I haven't really dug too deep into that, but I've heard she was also in that same vein of like, well, the suffering is kind of okay because it's actually just bringing more glory to God, and this is all about God and his glory. And just, I think that is what you just said there is very, it's used as a tool to sort of give yourself psychological, like this pressure release of like, oh, well, it's all going to be worth it in the end because God is going to, come back and fix everything. I was going to read this verse today. This is one that I would always kind of repeat. And every time I would read it, because, while my mom was alive, her pain and anguish was so sometimes just so, at being around her all the time, you just kind of sometimes wanted to escape from like, even though she was the one who had to live in her body. It was just so much to hear about all the time. But I would read this, Revelation 21:4. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things have passed away. And this idea that it was just, he's just going to come back and wipe away all the pain and sadness and wipe away all your tears. And it's a very comforting verse, but considering it comes in Revelation after all the like destruction and bloodshed, and it's just kind of interesting how it is sort of a way that you can handle the suffering of life, to imagine and to think about that there's a God who will make it all right in the end. And so it gives you a reason for the suffering and like we'd mentioned, like without that, you can kind of turn towards nihilism and this sort of existential dread of, what are we just, we're born and we live our lives and it's like the blink of an eye and we're gone and then that's it. And, that is one thing that I sort of struggle with as I've been deconverting, of just having that, like, there now I don't really have an answer, which in a way is a good thing, because I don't think anybody really has the answer. But in another way, you kind of have to find like different ways to deal and cope with the reality of suffering and the reality of life, and that it is, we are going to get old and die. And, even no matter how hard we try to prevent those things, it will come to us all. So, that is one thing that the Christian, I think that maybe because they've put such an emphasis on it, because of Jesus' suffering, that it does offer some kind of psychological benefit in the way of giving somebody comfort in their, in their anguish and and it's well known that, like, if you have a something to live for, or something to hope for and to strive for, gives your body strength. It helps you, like, in those times. So yeah, I don't know what you think about that, but I think
Yeah,
that,
I agree.
yeah,
Yeah, I think, and a good parallel to what you're saying there too is how the ways that this really deprives you of the freedom to fully grieve it. Something you
yeah,
said made me think of that. But like when you have someone die, and you're a Christian and they're a Christian, you're really seeing it framed as you didn't really lose them. In a blink of an eye, you'll be dead too, and then you enter into eternity, and you realize they've been there for a few more years than you, but they've been glorious and celebrating and painless. Everything's wonderful. They just went to the biggest party ever, pain-free, wonderful, exactly what everybody would want for the afterlife. And now you're there, and there's no more tears. What a great thing. So now you, in your life, where you've got a few more years to live before you see them again in heaven, you don't really have to grieve because you didn't really lose them. It's just, and God's grace will get you through this life anyway, till it's your turn to go.
yeah,
And it's like, but when you deconvert, you're like, oh, I almost need to re-grieve that because I really, really, really lost them. And
yeah,
that's it. Like, I don't get them back. And it's almost like the same thing, like, sort of, as preteens and teens were all, playing these video games where, I mean, I know some adults too, but in my life, it kind of stopped at teenagehood. But, when your character dies and your Pac-Man guy dies, the ghosts get the Pac-Man, what happens? You hit the reset button.
Yeah.
It's not really, you don't
Right.
really have to grieve that Pac-Man died. You get to start over in a second.
Yeah.
And it's almost like that with his suffering. Like, you don't have to really grieve that this horrible thing happened. It's all going to be undone and then some, and you'll be paid back double by God. So don't grieve. Don't grieve like the pagans. And they're
Well,
depriving you of the chance to fully face
yeah.
what happened, and some of it is really grievous, and you do need to grieve
Yeah.
properly, or you're just in denial.
And the same, not to do a tangent, but the same thing goes for forgiveness. When you're forced to forgive somebody who really hurt you and wronged you, and you don't actually process it in the proper way. But what I was going to say was, and on the flip side of that is, when you are doubtful of your loved one's salvation, or you just know that they plain didn't believe or never made a profession of faith, well, now you have an inordinate amount of despair and anxiety towards their eternal state. And you say, well, now you're grieving extra hard and more, it kind of sounds weird to say, but you almost grieve more than you would have, the more than I don't want to say it this way, but it's like more than it's appropriate. That doesn't sound right, but it's like you grieve more than you would have if you had just believed that, we lost them and this person's just no longer in our lives, and we have to mourn and like go through this process. But now you're like, oh my God, we'll just take it away from my family. But it's like, oh, Aunt Susie died, and I know she was, but I loved her so much. But she never made a profession, or she actively, was an unbeliever or something. Well, now you're going through tremendous psychological stress and torment over that person. And for some people that will like galvanize them to be like, well, now I just got to preach even harder and all this. And of course you go through those avenues of trying to like fix it, quote unquote, fix it. Where, and then there might be a lot of guilt associated with, maybe you never did say anything about Jesus to your best friend, and then he died in a car accident, or you were thinking about doing it, and then they, whatever, or they were suicidal, or, cause like I hope I'm not, this is kind of a triggering topic anyways, but I don't mean to just talk about that stuff so flippantly. But if somebody was going to do that, and you're say a Catholic, well, the Catholics believe that is a mortal sin, and a mortal sin is automatically, because like I said, I grew up Catholic, and my family, a lot of them would tell me stuff like that, like, oh, if you do this, it's a mortal sin, and there's no forgiveness for people who did that. And so the idea that if somebody's going to, go through so much suffering and trouble and mental torment and anguish in this life, and then to, unalive themselves, and then now you're like, well, they went through all this mental anguish and this torment in life, and now they're going through an eternal torment. And for me, that was always such a, how can a good God allow not only the suffering in the life, but you don't just get to end the suffering. If you weren't a believer, well, guess what? You get tortured when you're alive, and now you're going to get tortured forever. And so that it can really mess with you,
Yeah, it really can. I think that's a great point. And I think too, just to add to that just a teeny bit, one of the sicker aspects of that mentality is that often we would not necessarily justify people's horrific crimes against other people, but we would continually reframe it under the umbrella of God's sovereignty and say,
yeah,
I know you went through this horrible assault as a child or whatever. I know something horrible happened to you, even a crime.
yeah,
And there's that verse I remember reading, memorizing and going through this verse a lot as a kid, but Genesis 50:20, as for you, you meant evil against me. This is Joseph talking to his brothers, where his brothers had sold him into slavery and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
and tricked his father to thinking that he had been killed. But as
Yep.
for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for
God meant it
good,
for good.
to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. And it's like you could, in the sense of God's sovereignty, if you really believe that God is fully omniscient and fully powerful enough, and he knows he's prescient, he knows everything in advance. So he knew the incredible trauma and assault and violence that would be done against you and potentially, against your mind and your body, especially as a child. And he basically sat back and watched it happen and did not intervene because he was saying in his sovereignty and in this theology,
Yep.
yeah, I know you went through a lot. I know this was a crime. I've got a plan. So trust me. And it's like,
Right.
what kind
Plan.
of sickness are we dealing
The
with here
plan.
where you could look at childhood assault and say, yes, it was assault. Yes, crimes happen. Yes, people should pay in the human judicial court sense. But ultimately, this is between you and God, and you need to let God be the one who said, I let it happen, and
Yeah.
even in his sovereignty, I planned it, right? Because nothing
Yeah.
happens. He says, not even a sparrow falls to the ground without your
Yep.
Father in heaven knowing about it. If he planned this, then he planned the assaults and the suffering that would happen to you all through your life, even from the earliest days, so that he could bring glory to himself in some way. And again, it's just all these different angles in which they glorify
Yeah.
suffering, or in some way praise God or excuse God for what he allowed to happen, or intentionally did to you. And
Yeah.
it's like, man, oh man, what a mind job. But
And don't you dare question,
yeah,
because I was going to read, no, I don't want to read a whole bunch of scripture, but, who is this who obscures my counsel by words without knowledge? Now brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall inform me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? This is God. And God is saying to Job, because Job had, questioned him about, why are these things happening to me? And God is basically, tell me if you have understanding. Who fixed its measurements? Surely you know. And it's just basically, he goes on this tirade about all the stuff that he was there before, um, when everything was created. He created everything, so we have no right to question him for allowing us to go through this suffering. Like such a yeah. Sorry, that just kind of pisses me off when I think about
yeah,
that. Like the way that God in the Bible, the way that Yahweh speaks back and just sort of and people will use that in the same vein of what you're saying, where who are you to question God, or who are you to say, like, why are we like this? Why is there so much suffering? Because we just need to bow in awe and his white hot holiness. So because he's so holy that he allows all of these horrible, despicable things to happen to people, because he has some kind of ultimate plan. And like kind of like you had mentioned too, where it was kind of brought to mind. You did an interview with the guy H.G. Wells, not
yeah.
Wells, but is that it, right?
I forget his last name, but I know who you're talking about.
H.G.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
anyways,
I'll look it up.
he went through a lot of childhood trauma as well. He's very open about that, and to tell somebody like that you know, like you're suffering, it, like all the stuff that he went through, that right, that it's sorry, I just drew a blank, but basically what you just said, you're telling somebody that went through all this trauma and suffering in their life, when they had no way to fight back, they had no way to nobody to cry to or to call to, and they were scared for their life and all this kind of thing. And when that happens to you, similar to my mom as well, where at such a young age, it wires your brain in such a way that you are so uh, just your nervous system holds that. Your body keeps the score, as they say, but that this traumatic experience that happened to you. And so when somebody comes to you and tells you these things of like, well, you need to forgive so and so, and your suffering is all part of God's plan, um you know, if depending on the severity of what happened to you, that can be a very I don't know if upsetting is the right word, but like very like what? Like how does that make any sense that this is God's plan? Like that happened to me, right?
Yeah.
And you know, you would say I could imagine, yeah, I could hear my mom in my head is like, the hell it was, you know, or you know, like I hear the way my mom would talk is like, well, that's fucked up, you know, like I don't like that, like because why did I have to go through all that? Because to glorify God somehow. And where is this glory at, and how are we supposed to measure this? You know, and we just have to accept that it all goes back to Him. So, you know, whether or not you tough luck, basically, you know, and like God said in that when He's talking back to Joe, is like, you know, you don't have any room to talk because I made all this stuff. So sit
Yeah.
down. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I think there's great points and great. I appreciate you bringing up the story of Job. He certainly is a prime example, early example in the Old Testament on the Bible of like endure the suffering and don't you dare question it and use it to somehow bring glory to God. And I remember so many influences in my life, especially during college, that said whether it's your attempt to understand the deeper things of God and theology, or just your attempt to understand His will for your life, or your attempt to understand the suffering. Like you can ask all the questions you want, and God wants you to come honestly with your questions. But the most beautiful heart is the heart that says, God, I'm coming to you, yes, sort of with questions, but I'm also laying down my questions at your feet because I know that what I need most here is not answers to why there's suffering or why you did this or that. But my best heart that I can give you is a heart that says, I trust you as a little 3-year-old trusts their daddy.
Yeah.
You know, it's like I remember so many times when I would um, like have to move a child from one room to the other, or maybe they've come into my room. Maybe I'm working late. They've all been asleep. And they come in, daddy, I had a nightmare or whatever. And I'll say, okay, well, I'm totally here for you. I love you. Would it help you if you just slept in my bed for a little bit? And like, yeah, yeah. And so they'll fall asleep in my bed and I'll cuddle them. And then, you know, maybe a few 20, 30 minutes later, I can tell they're zonked again. They're out.
Yeah.
And so I'm ready to move them to their bed. And they stir for just a second, like what's going on, and they see that I've got them in my arms, and there's complete trust. They know that they're safely going to get from here to their bed. I'm not going to accidentally knock their head on the door or the wood or the wall. That I'm going to go slowly, safely, carefully, and in a few seconds they will be gently placed back in their bed under their covers, and it's just the world is completely safe. And like that's what God is asking you to do.
Well,
He's
that's a
saying, good.
sorry. I was just gonna jump in that's a wonderful thing for your children to experience, and that and they can have that, you know, kind of a core memory there. You know, I think that, you know, that's very, very, very healthy and necessary and needed, and that's what we should be doing. And for people who didn't have a father, either didn't have a father, or say their father was very abusive, it's hard to think, like it's hard to picture that, what you're saying, where God is just gonna like hug you and everything's gonna be safe because you were never safe. Like because your nervous system learned that you're not safe, and that
Yeah,
if you didn't have a good father, or maybe you had an actively bad father, and
yeah,
then the those types of things again. I think that like my mom was told some of these things, and to try to comfort and help her, and you know, well, you know, God has a plan and God's in control and this and that. And I think because of her just her relationship with her father, and like how he was abusive towards her, um she could never trust an authority figure in a man, I think.
yeah,
Or if she if there was that, it was like, it was filled with fear, kind of, because when you're programmed at such a young age to have those reactions and those responses to certain stimuli and stuff, it's like you can't, you literally can't control your body, like what's happening, and so that's where the panic and the anxiety and this stuff comes from. But anyways, I think it's wonderful that, when children can have those like very comforting things happen, or like knowing that, yes, I have a good father and that he's going to keep me safe and that all of that. But when you don't have that, I think it leaves a bit of a void, and those promises seem a bit hollow, I would think, because like, since you don't have a point of reference for what that means,
That's true. Yeah, it helps a lot. It's a lot easier to picture it when you've had it on a human level. But I think that's where, taking it back to the topic of suffering, like that's what effectively you are being invited to by the Christian worldview, is to say, trust your heavenly Father. He's got you in his safe, loving arms. And you always got to bring in a little C.S. Lewis to clarify it. He's the lion. Is he safe? Of course he's not safe, but he's good. And as long as he's good, then ultimately it will all be okay for all of us. And that's what we certainly bank on. But Keith, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing. You've had some great stuff. I forget if we've really touched base much about an interview and where we've left stuff off, if we have, but please reach out to me on Facebook or email, and let's get you an interview. You sound like you've got a lot to share about. Let's get this going. I can't wait to do it.
I've been considering it, and I do want to do it. I think I want to kind of write down, and I've been meaning to email you, and I'm sorry if I haven't reached out yet, but I want us to like write things down, I think, and kind of get my story straight, so to speak, so I'm not just rambling, because I do tend to have a tendency to just go on and on. So
yeah, I fully support that idea. I've been doing the same thing, writing stuff. I've been writing stuff down for like 3 years, so I totally agree. It's sometimes you just got to take the time. But if it helps at all, I'm going to be doing a live stream within the next 2 weeks at some point, where I've been writing down notes that I've been taking as I've been doing interviews. And I often have a little notepad, and people don't even probably know, but I'm literally writing with my left hand. I'm a lefty. I'm one of the good guys. I'm writing down with my left hand notes about like my perception of how the interview was going, and like something, they did something really well. They did something that kind of, that was unfortunate the way that worked out. And I just write, and I'll end up with an interview where I haven't looked at what I'm writing, but I can tell it's probably legible, and I'll go back and read it and type it up. And I'll end up with 3, 4, 5 pages of notes as I'm like literally live critiquing the interview and taking notes about how to prepare the next person to say, hey, there was an interview and this kind of didn't work out so well, so be careful about this. Don't think through this. And so I've got tons of notes. And at some point in the next, hopefully week or two, I'm going to do a live stream. It'll obviously be one of the more boring ones, because it's not aimed at all deconverted Christians. It's aimed at those who are specifically preparing to do an interview with me or with somebody, but hopefully it's still helpful to enough people that it's worth it. But feel free to watch that when we do it, because I would love, and that's not one that's going to be much feedback. It's just going to be me talking through stuff. But I'm hopeful that it will help a lot of people to think, oh yeah, I was just thinking more simply like set up the camera, the microphone, a little bit of lighting, make sure it's quiet. We're good to go. What else is there to really think through? It's like, actually, there's a lot to think through, but you have to kind of have someone walk you through all the ways that things fall apart to avoid those things, and then what's left is usually pretty good.
Well,
but anyway,
this might sound weird, but I will sometimes, because I was thinking about doing that, and I would just like on my drive to work, I'd be like, okay, so what will I say? And then I'll start talking to myself, and I'm like, and I do these little rabbit trails where I get stuck and stuff, and I'm like, I don't want to like, get on here and freeze up or miss something or not say something. So but that's really impressive that you can write and listen. And I never knew that you were writing it. You're pretty good at hiding it.
Yeah. It's rare that I finish up an interview without 4 or 5 pages of notes.
That's neat.
Yeah. But anyway, well, thank you so much. Please do reach out when the time is right, And I'd love to have. And in the meantime, please feel free to jump in whenever these topics that I keep coming up with. I'm gonna try to come up with one every. Like, I want to do this every night. It won't always be 8 to 10 Eastern. Sometimes it'll be more like 7 to 9 or 6 to 8. But whenever any of them strike your fancy and you can respond to some of them, please jump in. We'd love to have you again. But thank you, Keith. Great to meet you tonight.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thanks so much. Thank you, Keith. I'm going to read a few quick comments here that have come in, and then we'll jump in either to the next person who wants to jump in and talk, or if no one jumps in, I've got a few more things to say while we're waiting. Let's see here. SpaghettiOs, great to see you again. You were on for a minute yesterday. I appreciate that. I'm not sure why God delights in and needs our suffering and crushing. It's apparently for his glory. Why does crushing empower him? He needs us to deny our own humanity and needs to magnify him. Yeah. There was also no differentiation between the suffering that kind of comes from usual hardships of being human and the suffering imposed on us by spiritually, emotionally, and abusive people. That's a good point. And I would add in there also suffering imposed upon us by our own bad choices, or foolishness or stupidity. You're told to stay in it all, pray through it all, endure hardness as a good soldier. Yeah, that's a really, really good point. Appreciate you sharing all that. Totally agree. Jesus gets all the praise, but never the blame. Yeah, as does Yahweh. Hey, Legend Jeff, appreciate it. Appreciate being here. Suffering is a central theme of Christianity for the victims of conquest. It was spread with the sword. Yeah. Now, if I can add to what Jeff just said, another thing I think that's behind this is the fact that for so many people, one of the appeals of Christianity over the centuries really has been the appeal to the poor. Often, you see Jesus as being a hero to the poor. You see the other characters in the Bible being, heroes to the poor. Not always, you got your King Solomon and with all of his stuff, but a lot of it is, Jesus is going out to the poor. Blessed are the poor in spirit. The people, the widow's mite story. This woman had almost nothing to give, but she effectively, in giving it, gave more than these other people that had pockets full of money. And Christianity in many ways has appealed for a very long time to those who are in real intense suffering, and it's given them hope and said, I mean, it's a false hope. It's a made up hope. It's a mythology based hope, but it's still for people that are, poor and have no hope in sight. It says to them, hang on, better days are coming, either in this life or the one to come. And when you see what God was doing with your suffering, you will sit back and cry with tears of grief, but also tears of joy that at last this tapestry where I thought it was all these loose threads, he will flip it and show you that he's been making a beautiful painting with the threads of your life. So let him do it. And you will ultimately cry tears of joy that you have a God who is in control and who has been writing a beautiful story, even though you haven't seen more than a few snippets here or there, and it seems like it's chaos. You can trust him. I think a lot of this is it's what Jeff's saying, that victims of conquest with the sword and that suffering, but also the suffering of just poverty and early death. I mean, how many people over the centuries that we could have said and that believed in Jesus were probably illiterate and had children, many children that died. They would maybe have 10 children and 5 of them died by the time they were 5 years old or something. And back then, simple diseases and infections would take whole families out. So much suffering, so much hopelessness, so much inability to fight against common diseases that we now have a lot of choices about how to fight and hopefully stay alive through. And they didn't have that. They had so much hopelessness. And these people got these charlatans that said, I know your suffering seems meaningless. I know this is so much despair, but there's a bigger picture. And obviously there's not a bigger picture. It's just sad, and certainly sad that Christianity in many ways killed so much science for so long in the Dark Ages. But at the same time, I can see why people got sucked into it. If you feel like you're literally at the end of your rope and then some, and there's no reason to really get up in the morning. It's just so sad. Those people, you give them this Kool-Aid, and of course they're going to drink it. They're desperate for anything. I mean, It's like a mirage in the desert. I'll drink the sand if I have to. I am so desperate for anything. That sand looks like water. Give it to me. I will guzzle it down. And it's not what you think it is, but it makes you think that there's something there. A crucial domino for me, I could excuse my own, but I struggle to justify other people's suffering. I presume you mean I could excuse my own suffering, but I struggled to justify other people's suffering until I couldn't. I think I'm interpreting that correctly. Yeah, I agree. And Shell says, I'm so sorry to hear about your mom, Keith. Yeah, ditto. Much respect for Keith tonight. Hey, Cold On Gaming, great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. The link I put in is the link for the H.G. Roberts interview that Keith mentioned. That's that one. Resist Depression, dropping by. Some love. Can't stay. No worries. Thank you so much for dropping by. Appreciate your being a part of our community. Forgive your earthly father for his sins and trust your heavenly Father who will let you suffer without intervening. Makes sense. God is whack. Yeah. Forgive your earthly father for his sins and trust your heavenly Father who will let you suffer without intervening. Yeah, and that was, I mean, so many of us, I think that was part of our deconstruction, is saying, God, where in the world are you? Both in my life, the lives of people around me, the world. Like, why are there still world wars? Why are world wars? Why are there kids dying of starvation this very hour? Still, there's people dying of starvation, children dying of starvation this hour while we've been talking. Come on, God. Kids being assaulted, kids being trafficked, and you don't have anything to say about it except, gosh, I'll make it right in 1,000 years when Christ returns. You know, he'll return someday. I'm not telling you when, but when he does, it'll all be okay. Okay, well, it's not okay for those kids, you know, being trafficked. Why don't you do something right now? Again, if anybody wants to join, I put the StreamYard link there in the comments. You're welcome to join. Unless and until someone joins, I'm going to share a few more thoughts about this topic. I think a lot of us found that, you know, self-denial, which is a lot of what we heard in Christianity, deny yourself across the board, take up your cross and follow him, that death to self was a big part of this, that your normal human reaction to suffering, which is to recoil and say, oh, this is bad, I want to protect myself, that's part of the self-denial process, is to say, no, let God hurt you. Let God hurt you. Let him crush you. And that's like a war on you, on your personhood. When you express your needs, you feel selfish as a Christian. When you want rest or even things like safety or freedom, it can begin to feel really suspicious if you're neck deep in this concept that suffering is what God is not just allowing, but he's intentionally planning it. He's planning to hurt me so that I will trust him. And you certainly feel in some ways disconnected from your inner voice that cries out and says, I wish this weren't happening. I want this to stop. And yet you have this other voice that says, do it, God, do it. You know, put me into the depths of despair so that I will go through the valley of the shadow of death and put my eyes on you. I don't want to be in the promised land focused on the milk and honey if that's going to take my eyes off you. If you need to put me through the wilderness wandering, I would rather be in the wilderness where you can grab my attention and say, I told you to keep your eyes on me, than be in this wonderful promised land, but my eyes are not on you, they're on the milk and the honey. And you beg for God to be your focus and for safety to mean less and less to you. I think certainly in that context, a lot of us could feel like joy and happiness, that is, you know, again, normal human desires for that really could, for a lot of us, be a temptation and even feel like it's far less holy of a pursuit, because, you know, the joy that we want the joy of the Lord, but like any kind of joy in life, in a sense of human delight, frivolity, anything worldly, that just felt like I should feel guilty about that a little bit, you know? I mean, Christianity puts guilt on us for so much, so much. But if you're resting too much, and I've talked before about how I struggle with that, if I'm resting too much or just watching TV too much, you should feel guilty because you're not about the things of the Lord and the kingdom if you're watching 6 hours of football on a Sunday. That makes no sense. And again, we talked about Jesus, but, you know, he's the model. He's the one you're going back to. The crucifixion is the center of your faith and of your worldview, and his sacrifice, his blood, his agony, the whipping that we talked about, and the Passion of the Christ movie from Mel Gibson, his submission, Lord, not my will, but yours be done. all these central images that we have in Christianity around his, the suffering savior motif. You're taught to imitate that, to appreciate it, beyond words, of course, for what Christ did for you, but then to imitate it, walk like Christ, and to think that if you are in pain, that proves that God loves you and that you love him if you do it graciously. And I think I said this before in some other context, but I think some of these end up shaping our interpersonal relationships with other people, where it's nothing to do with God or church anymore. It's just our relationships with people. But it can be tragic in that if you learn to think that if I am devoted to someone and I'm suffering because of someone that's, abusive, narcissistic, whatever the word is of the day, that's hurting me intentionally, if I believe in my head that I'm supposed to stay and be committed and that they really do love me and that they're doing this to ultimately for my good, that you could stay in some wicked bad, awful relationships purely because you have been pre-programmed to think someone hurting you is proof of their love. That's, what else can you say besides that's some sick ass stuff? Really sick. But that's what Yahweh, you're trained from the earliest days. Yahweh will crush your ass, but he's doing it to make you get your eyes off your sin, get your eyes off this world, and get your eyes, for heaven's sake, on heaven, on him, on his throne. And let this world fade, let your sin fade, focus. And if he has to crush you, if he has to make you a quadriplegic, if he has to put you in a wheelchair, you metaphorically, your dream is, I want to be a quarterback in the football team. And you're like, God, please don't make me break my legs and make me play a flute. You're like, I just want to be a quarterback and I want to be, I want to be tackling everybody. And God, the worst thing for me will be my legs are broken and you make me play a flute. Like you get the sense that God just has it out for you. He wants to just embarrass you and make you suffer on purpose. But he's doing it because if you have your way, it will ultimately be to your demise. And if you let him have his way, you will not only get glory the way he wants, you'll get your original dream too. You'll get both. So which one do you want? Do you want your way and nothing and it falls apart? Or do you want his way and you get your way tacked on as a bonus? That was woven into everything. I've got Cold Iron here. Cold Iron I'm going to bring in a second, but for anyone that wants to join us, this is a call-in and an open mic kind of night. So I'm going to put the link in. If anyone wants to join, Cold Iron's about to pop in. But if anyone also wants to jump in after Cold Iron, please feel free. We'd love to have you. We're at about an hour and 20 minutes so far. We'll go to about 2 hours max and then wrap it up. If we feel like there's just so much more to talk about, if there's people waiting, I'll just sort of apologize that we can't all be on tonight, and we'll do a duplicate. We'll do part 2 tomorrow or the next day. But Cold Iron, here we go. Great to see you again.
Hey, Tim.
You're a regular now. You officially have done a hat trick. What's your thoughts on our topic tonight?
Yeah, growing up in the style of Christianity that I was exposed to, they never, to my recollection, glorified suffering. The emphasis was always that Christianity and God would relieve suffering. So I'm oftentimes later on, after hearing everyone else's type of story, I was hearing lots of people talk about how the glorification of their suffering in Christianity, as opposed to just, like I said, the Christianity would relieve suffering.
Yeah.
And that's the interesting difference.
Is it like prosperity gospel stuff?
No,
is it,
no.
A lot of prosperity gospel would say that too. Like God's here to make you sick and wealthy and
prosperity gospel is like going to make you rich. There's like
right, but also they'll protect you from cancer and all that.
And what I grew up in, it was like just a progressive liberal Christianity, and it's doesn't glorify suffering as good. It's just like Christianity will take it away, and when in heaven there is no suffering, stuff like that.
Right.
Not,
God'll get you through it.
yeah, it's nothing about you'll be rich by being Christian or anything. Nothing like that from prosperity gospel. It just here are some good morals, and you won't have suffering in heaven. Not you are great by enduring suffering. Nothing like that.
Well, that is interesting. I appreciate you pointing out that there are different versions of how Christians approach this topic. This was like all the different variations of Baptist and Presbyterian and Calvinist and a lot of other subsets, Southern Baptist that I went to. This was the main theme in many ways. This was a very consistent across denominations and perspectives on the Bible and how to interpret it. They would all say this, but I appreciate you pointing out that there are Christians that wouldn't have said this, and that they would have had a much more maybe balanced approach to just you're going to suffer, God will get you through it, and trust in Him, and keep it simple. But we're not going to try to make it like some kind of martyrdom complex. Like if you get martyred, this is a great thing. But I hear you. It's interesting to see the differences.
Yeah, it's recognizing that suffering happens, but this will get you through it. Not you are to be honored because you are suffering so much.
Yeah. Well, I think arguably, just looking at the Bible, there are a ton of. I mean, there may be Christians that interpret it differently, but there are a ton of verses, especially if I'm thinking of Paul. But there's a ton of verses from Paul that talk about you need to be willing to suffer and take up your cross and follow Him, and that He will.
Yeah,
He will
Paul
do all
definitely
these things.
says that. Job.
Peter says that. Yeah, Job.
Job is big on that. So it's like it's definitely in there, but
yeah.
Well,
I'm glad you were spared from some of the garbage. That's a good thing.
Yeah. So in some ways, it's like the more you emphasize suffering, the tighter their hold on you is. But when you break it, you break even harder away from it. Whereas like with more liberal Christianity, it's like they're not holding it as tight, but there's not as much of trying to break out of it either. So it's like how tightly it's held versus how easily people jump out.
Yeah. And the pendulum sometimes swings really far for those of us who are in fundamentalism. It's true.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of YouTubers on atheism and who are like diehard fundamentalists, super anti being in Christianity, and it's very much less common for anyone who is like sort of into it to get diehard against it.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think it's understandable because we in some ways as ultra fundamentalists, and I would definitely say I was an ultra fundamentalist, but not as hardcore as some, but right up there, top 10%. When you're in it, you just feel so sick to your stomach that you're just like, I've been so deeply betrayed and duped. I cannot get anywhere near this kind of deception again. And that pendulum swing is in many ways self-protection, where you're just like, this is nuts. Like I remember that that show, The Truman Show. You ever watch that, where Jim Carrey's everyone else is an actor, an actress, but him. And there's this one scene, like there towards the second half of it, where he's starting to question if there's some big story about his life going on, and his friend is sitting there on this street or dock or something late at night. They're shooting the breeze, hitting golf balls, and he's got the little earplug from the guy that's like running the whole show, telling him exactly what to say. And he's saying, Truman, everyone's not in on it, because if everyone was in on it, then I'd be in on it, and I'm your best friend, and I'm not in on it. And as he's saying it, he's in on it. He's being told what to say. And like when you realize, it's like that level of deception, your best friend in a sense, meaning, and I'm using that to illustrate us, like you are your own best friend. You're your own voice in your head. Your best friend yourself was lying to yourself for decades. You get so sick of it that the next time someone comes along and says, hey, I'll be your best friend, you're like, nah, thanks. I've been here, done that, or, once bitten, twice shy, that's why a lot of people don't want to ever get remarried, because like our dating and courtship was beautiful, our honeymoon was beautiful, and you know what? Eventually, it turns so poisonous. Marriage isn't what I thought it was, and I'm not so sure I believe in it anymore. It's a shame that we swing that pendulum so far, and a lot of people lose that romanticism and that hopefulness. But I can understand it. We swing because we've been so hurt, and we get protective. But anyway, I digress. Was there anything else? We do have Shell in the studio too. But was there anything else you wanted to share about this particular topic on your heart?
Nothing specific. Just that different perspective of like where suffering wasn't so fetishized within Christianity is another perspective.
Yeah, I appreciate that very much. Yeah, and I'm just reading your comment here where you said this said as much suffering wasn't really a big thing in the Christianity I was exposed to growing up. Yeah, and there's certainly some variation, and I appreciate knowing that there's some people who grew up in far less dangerous and toxic versions of it. But to me it's all still, it's all it takes is one preacher to get you all back right in the poison. I don't really see liberal Christianity as much of an improvement, but I'm so glad that some of the what would you call it, religious trauma was spared for some of the people. So that's good stuff. Well, thank you so much, Cold Iron. Great to see you again. Jump in anytime. Thank you so much. And we're going to jump right into also, let me read a few quick comments here to catch up on them. I'm going to skip the Kill Bill one. Can you imagine a million stories written in the clouds while you walked the plains of your forefathers? We live in a universe built on suffering. It deals the pain, baby. Yeah. This, in many ways, that's a great point we should probably go back to. We live in a world where everything that's ever lived keeps on dying, and a vast majority of things that have ever lived and died have so far, meaning most things, except for the things alive right now, but most everything that's ever lived and died, arguably the majority of it has had some very painful deaths, where they've died of being eaten alive, or of starvation, or of famine, or fire or something. Most things that have died in this world have died horrifically. In terms, when you're looking at all the animal kingdom, it's just amazing. Suffering is so much a part of this universe. And that's honestly one reason, real quick, and Shell, I'm going to bring you in one second, but just to make this comment, that's one of the reasons that I struggle with people who say, the more that I get away from the fundamentalism and the hellfire, I just get this more spiritual sense that the universe is just full of love and God is love. And I'm like, 99.99999% of this universe would kill you in a heartbeat just because of the coldness or the heat or lack of oxygen. Almost everywhere on this planet would kill you. And the place that's left, meaning this earth, where you won't die, you still have a really good chance, when you look at all of Earth's history, of dying quickly, being eaten in the first year of your life as an animal. Something grabs you and you're its dinner. Some other disease or something, and even human history alone. So many ways in which our suffering has been intense, where you get a toothache and it turns into an infection and you're dead from a toothache. It's just crazy to think how much suffering is woven into our lives. And for those people that just want to say, oh, I just feel so much love in this universe, I kind of feel like you're speaking from a very privileged position, because for most people, that's not even close to reality, and never will be, both in terms of all of Earth's history, but even current history, current events. Like, there's a lot of people suffering so bad that the idea of saying, I just feel the universe's love just flowing through and all over me. There's people, the wars and the famines and the starvation. I'm sorry, people that say that are in a privileged position and a little bit disconnected from the real world, in my opinion. But one more quick comment. Cold Iron blew my mind by being nice. Cold Iron, you're a nice guy. We appreciate that. Lots of applause. I'm going to bring Shell in here, and we'll see, depending on how long Shell and I talk. This is maybe the last one, but if anyone wants to jump in after Shell, we'll try to make space for you, and we'll take it right up to the 2-hour mark. But Shell, here we go. Shell, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you okay. Hi.
Great. Thanks for calling back again. You're also a regular, so lots of frequent flyer points to you tonight. But how are you doing, and how's your day, and what do you have to share with us about this topic tonight?
Doing well. Unfortunately, I just heard a friend who has a chronic illness is back in the hospital again. So going to see her tomorrow. So that's not wonderful, but it's kind of like routine for her at this point, and it's yeah.
So sorry.
So, but yeah, along the lines of suffering, I guess, the topic tonight. Just something that doesn't make sense to me is that we could have an omni God. I don't know if any of this has already been said, sorry, because I've been kind of in and out, but like a God who can see everything, be everywhere all at once, and is all powerful. It would be impossible for a God that has all of those powers to both be benevolent and there still be suffering in the world. Because if he's everywhere all at once and he could see everything and he had the power to fix everything, and yet there was still suffering, that's no longer a benevolent God. Like,
Yeah,
there's
especially violence against children, and yeah, I totally agreed.
yeah, unless it were like for his ego, and then again that would make him not a benevolent God, like for us to turn to him or something, and then so that could not be a benevolent God that would allow someone to suffer so that their faith would grow stronger, so that he would get more praise, or whatever. That wouldn't make sense to me.
Yeah, well
But
said. Well said.
I feel like every religion kind of has, I don't want to say every religion because I haven't explored every single religion, but many religions have kind of this theme of asceticism, like to some degree, where the flesh is bad, or like the id, the ego, and the super ego, right? Like the base animalistic instincts or whatever is bad, and we're supposed to be trying to get away from that to find some sort of enlightenment. That's in just about every religion. And I mean, I think that Christianity especially, although that's the one I'm most familiar with, but I think Christianity especially does push it to an extremely unhealthy degree. Like Keith was saying in Cold Iron, like they fetishize suffering, right? So am I freezing up or?
No, you're good. I hear a little crackling with your audio, but no, you're not freezing. No, am I freezing
Okay.
on your side?
No, I was just making sure because it was really quiet.
I just like to
and I
make sure
know,
you have a chance to share all that's on your heart.
yeah, mine's my Wi-Fi is just not so great, so I just want to make sure. But yeah, like Keith and Cold Iron were saying that Christianity just sort of fetishizes suffering, where and like if you're not suffering, you feel like you're not doing enough, like you were saying. I remember a girl, after it was a particularly like impassioned like sermon about, if you're not on the front lines for God kind of thing, you're not a real Christian. I mean, that's essentially what it boiled down to, right? The sermon. And this one girl was crying because she's like, I've lived such a comfortable life. Like, I've not been through suffering. I've had everything easy. And like, she felt that somehow made her less, than those who'd suffered or something. Like, she idealized the suffering of other people.
Right.
And that's not good. I think a good mindset to have. But that is what it becomes, is like, I need to find some way to suffer for God.
Yeah, that's a good point. I see where you're connecting those dots, and I totally agree. There's a part of us that feels like if you're not suffering, you're doing something wrong, for sure.
I mean, I know I kind of did feel that way too, because I don't know if you saw my message earlier. I was asking you about if we knew someone mutual who was a missionary in Papua New Guinea as well through New Tribe Missions. I don't know if you saw that, but he told us a story where I think he and his wife were captured by like the native tribes or whatever. And his wife was pregnant, so they wound up letting them go, but they took his coworker or another missionary instead, and his wife, and I think they were killed. So I remember hearing that, but then at the same time as they're telling us, like, it's extremely dangerous to do this, go over there, and there's all these dangers. And he was like telling us a story about how he was on a boat and he got shot in the butt with a poison dart and all kinds of stuff. And
Wow.
the crazy thing of it is, by the end of his sermon, we were all like pumped about it. You know what I mean? Like, we were all like, oh yeah, we want to be missionaries and all this. And I was convinced for the longest time I wanted to be a missionary and do something like that, go over there. And I was talking to him about it and stuff. And then I almost had another opportunity, but then I met my husband and stuff. And so we kind of settled down. But yeah, it's just like this idea that you have to put yourself in danger, or you're not, really a true Christian willing to sacrifice. Like the stories, like the story of, I don't know if someone already said this, but the rich man and the poor man, how the rich man who was comfortable, he didn't go to heaven, he went down to hell, and he was asking for a drop of water, but the poor man went up to heaven. So it's this idea that suffering is,
like all the whole idea of your tears are being held in a bottle, and God's going to restore everything. And I love that phrase when I was a Christian, that the Lord will restore the years that the locusts have eaten. And he'll pay you back double. He'll pay you back double for your trouble, which you saw in Job and other stories. And it's very, very true. And I remember, I don't know if you remember, there was this guy, maybe, I don't know, 5-7 years ago, that was trying to do missions work with a tribe that was like off limits, because everyone warned everybody, like, if you go to that island where those tribal people are, they are so afraid of all outsiders, they will kill you. Like, that you don't get a chance to like warm up to them and show them you're a nice guy. Like, they'll just kill you on sight.
yeah.
And do you remember the story? The guy went, and of course they killed him in minutes. He didn't get anywhere, but he was going to share the gospel. But that kind of stuff was almost like the hero stories that I would grow up with, of like, if you're willing to go and do anything, even if you get killed right away, or eventually, that's a great life. What a great way to go out, because like, what happens the moment that you get killed and you die for Christ, for the sake of the missions field and the gospel? You're martyred. You wake up 1 second later, and you don't think about the poison darts or the machetes or whatever. You are instantly in a glorified body, dancing for joy with the Lord. And like, who would not want that? And who would not imagine that God is extending extra grace and approval and pride over the children of his that are willing to do anything for the sake of the gospel? And this man foolishly went to a tribe that he was warned, don't go there, they will kill you in a heartbeat. And they did, as expected. It's just not, they're just not safe to go to. They're just not ready for connection with the rest of the world yet. And somehow I'm sure that he and the people that sent him and supported him and encouraged him were just like, you're probably going to die. This is probably exactly how this is going to play out. But look, if God's putting on your heart to do it, we'll support you, do it. And if you die, honestly, like, what a great thing. You lost everything, but from the world's perspective, but in that moment you gained everything.
Yeah.
And man, oh man, those were the hero stories that I was just absolutely indoctrinated with. And in the sense, like, do it with them, be willing to go, because not that you have a death wish, but just if it happens, it happens. God's got you, and it's going to be a great next step once you die. And it's such a beautiful thing to realize that that's all garbage. It's not true. And to think, not that I want to preserve my life in the sense that I wouldn't give my life up for anything that's, valuable, or be a hero. Certainly if it's like, oh, there's a little girl in a burning house, so you're going to go save her. But no, if you save her, there's a good chance you're not coming back out. That's a worthwhile cause. Go save the little girl, get her out of the burning house. You might die. It is what it is. That there's worthy causes and worthy reasons to die. But
Right.
to do it for this sake of
Made up
a mythology, it's like, you got to be kidding me. Like, there's a normal sense of, I want to preserve my life and mitigate suffering in my life. I will suffer when necessary for a really good cause, but not for mythology. And that's where it's so sick when you realize what's really going on in this whole thing,
Yeah, definitely. I think about, like, now looking from an outward perspective at the Gospels and the New Testament, just wondering what were the writers, because when it comes down to it, it wasn't actually God breathed, that it was human writers doing this, right? Like, what was the writer's goal in writing these things? Is it a sense of control over people because they never feel like they're good enough? Is it so that you can weaponize them at the drop of a hat and mobilize them? You know what I mean? Like, if you feel like the ultimate, virtue signaling, or the ultimate goal, or treasures are stored up in heaven for you whenever you suffer for God and everything. If you feel like that's true, like, it's much more easy, I think, to convince someone like that to go to war and say that, we're on God's side. I mean, from the very, very early stages of Christianity, they were already doing that. They were already mobilizing people, using this as a way to invoke God, and get people on their side to fight for causes and things like that. So I think I wonder if that's where a lot of the writing comes from. And then
Yeah.
just this pervasive idea. I mean, it's all throughout different cultures and everything, this pervasive idea that if you refrain from worldly pleasures and fleshly pleasures and things like that, that you're somehow more wise, and you're more they just idealized that, the wisdom, I guess, from an ascetic lifestyle. And you don't come across as greedy and slavish, or I don't know, but
Yeah.
I don't know. So I just wonder about, like, what are the writers' points in writing these things, because it wasn't actually, God breathed. So now I look back at that stuff and I'm like, well, what were they thinking when they wrote this? I mean, it's impossible to know, but just to try to think about what they could have been writing for, I don't know.
Yeah, their motivations. I mean, I think you're probably right for at least part of it, because some of the passages that are either sort of directly quoted, or at least alluded to in the Bible, where they're talking about things like sons of light, children of darkness. Those are all concepts that are already heavily in place with the Essenes and the Qumran community, where they're talking about those things. And you can see how this mentality progressed from the Essene lifestyle. Not all of them, there were different kinds of Essenes, but there were some that were preparing for war, where they did believe that the end was very close, and that angels were about to just, the sky was going to pop open and 10,000 angels were going to come, and we're going to destroy all these pagans, the Romans, and every other oppressor. Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, a lot of people, they thought that the Messiah was going to be like an actual military leader, like how, I guess,
and that they were going to fight. Yeah, and they're going to fight with the angels against these bad guys. And so, I think you're right. They were enlisting warriors in a sense. I don't think that was the only or necessarily even main reason, but I think you're onto something there for sure.
Well, and I mean, even by the time of, Constantine, or I think even before Constantine, there were, skirmishes, but with Constantine, I mean, he invoked God to say, I'm going to reunify Rome. God, gave me a vision that says I'm going to do this. And so you're all protected, you're all fine, fighting for our side. Like, it kind of bolsters morale, and morale is extremely important in, military. Yeah, I mean, I think they were outnumbered by Maxentius at the Battle of Milvian Bridge. And so in order to like drum up support, he had his men draw the Cairo symbol on their shields, right?
I don't
But
remember that story, but I'm good. Tell us whatever you remember of it.
it just, the fact that it's just so easy to invoke God when you have this built-in idea that suffering is like the highest attainable like glory,
Yeah.
It's so easy to weaponize people and mobilize people, I think, when that's the frame of thought, I guess. But
And
yeah,
especially when you think that there's a big reward coming very soon for the bigger the suffering, the bigger the reward. It's amazing how much
store up
motivation
for
that is.
yourselves treasures in heaven. Yeah.
I would say
Yeah.
just a quick addition. I think a lot of this too was related to the mystery cults, and not just a sense of trying to enlist people into the military, but just to say that we are a school of thought, a school of religion, a school of philosophy
Yeah.
that sees the world in a certain way, and we want to enlist people. Arguably not everybody. I think a lot of them wanted to enlist a very small amount of people who would be willing to go through all the ranks and lessons, in a sense, of these mystery cults, understanding that most people would read the books and not understand them. A few people would go through to the deeper level and understand there's a metaphorical basis for this, and that if you interpret it correctly, it's much more about the Gnostic understanding of the universe. And that if you want to have experiences where you can get in a trance and you can descend or ascend up to the levels of heaven, like Enoch or like Paul, you want to do this, like you have to go through the mystery school to understand the deep, stealthy, secret mysteries of this universe. But we as a school of religion can teach you this. I think they were doing the same thing, and they used the Jesus stories as just another way of trying to explain it. But the fact that they copied them from Old Testament stories, the fact that they copied them from the Greco-Roman mystery cults and from Homer's Odyssey and all that, it's pretty clear that, I don't think there was a guy, but I think they were just continuing a long tradition of saying, we if you're truly trying to understand what this universe is really about, the different levels of the Gnostic level of like earth, like physical stuff is bad, but spirit is good, and there's a bunch of levels in between us. How to ascend through that, how to get to the higher planes. We've got a way to show you. We'll help you with meditation. We'll help you with fasting. We'll help you with perhaps substances, mushrooms or whatever. We'll help you to ascend and have these visions so you can figure out what's going on behind the scenes. Obviously, there's going to be people that would just love to know the mysteries of the universe if that had been the way it worked. And I think they suckered people into that. But I'm sure it's a mixture of motivations. But we're going back to the suffering topic. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I read the Gospel of Thomas. There's the Acts of Thomas and the Gospel of Thomas. I think it was the Gospel of Thomas is the one that's the Gnostic sayings.
Right.
And it was so like trippy. I don't know. Like,
it
you
is.
could imagine they were probably doing something. Like,
yeah, they were having a good day.
Yeah, I think so. But yeah, back to suffering. So something else that I just wanted to bring up is like specifically women's suffering in a few different senses. Like, we are supposed to put ourselves lower, that sort of thing within religion, be the helpmeet, be the helper, like while the man kind of goes out and does the heroic, the glorious things, that sort of thing. There's that whole idea that's specifically fed to to women in the religion, and of course, like in abusive relationships and things like that. Just having all of the verses that talk about, obeying your husband, and that like the church, obeys Christ, that sort of thing. I can't think of any specific. That's bad. I guess, I spent how many 25 years of my life memorizing verses, and I haven't had to use many for, I guess, like 5 years now, or 7 years now. So they're all just kind of, I don't know.
That's a good thing. It's a good thing to get the garbage out. I can
Maybe.
applaud that.
It's like it'll pop in there though when you least expect it.
Yeah, it's a good. I love your points on it. I was just I thought you were going to go a different direction at first with Eve's suffering with childbearing as a result of her
Yeah.
sin. Is like we've been messing around with the guilt factor from day one.
There's that aspect too, though. So we expect, and I mean, I know that there are whole ranges of opinions on pro-life, pro-choice. It doesn't just have to do with Christianity or religious thinking or anything like that. I'm not going to say, but the idea that we're fed that it's like murder and a sin, like a grave sin, to abort a fetus, when only 1 in 4 pregnancies make it to term. On top of that, just in the US alone, there are, and you can fact check me on this if you want, there are approximately 900,000 natural miscarriages per year that occur. So if you had a good God, a good omni God who was in control of everything and powerful enough to put a stop to that, and at the same time he valued life so much that he would not allow a woman who was in an abusive relationship or in a or had medical issues or was essayed or to have control over her own body, because it would be taking an innocent life. If that were the case, I just, from the Christian perspective, I would reason, then why does he allow 900,000 miscarriages a year? Why does he only allow, did I say 1 in 4 go to term? I think I
so.
had that flipped. I think I had that flipped. So 1 in 4 pregnancies won't make it, I believe. I gotta look this up now. I'm sorry. I had it in my head.
No, it's fine. I think your point's well taken though. That there's a lot of suffering. Yeah, regardless.
Yeah, the 900,000, that was a specific thing I had looked up. But is it 1 in 4?
Yeah. Well, I think there's so many ways in which we.
Yeah, 1 in 4 end in miscarriage. I'm sorry.
There's so many ways in which we twist and distort reality. I think this is one of them on several different critical planes. But at the end of the day, just since we're almost out of time here, but I think just to bring it back to the sort of the big picture, if I could, that we have a part of us that is so uncomfortable with suffering that we have to make up some kind of fictional perspective and story about how this all fits together. We don't like puzzles where, if you go buy a puzzle to do with your child, and because they maybe just tend to be messy, they end up throwing a piece out or throwing one, behind the bed, and you never know, you never find it. And the next time you do that puzzle with them, there's 3 or 4 pieces missing. You're like, you know what? This isn't much fun. Like, it's not fun to work on a puzzle. And when we're all done, there's 3 or 4 pieces left and we have no idea, like we cannot finish this puzzle. The angst of that, even though it's on a silly level like that, it's not very fun. Let's either find the pieces or throw this out, but we're not going to keep doing this and have a puzzle that you can never finish. Our lives are like those puzzles, and we hate that so much. And suffering is like these empty places. And it's like, we got to fill these puzzle pieces with something. or it just irks us and it feels empty and meaningless. And we do it by way of saying this suffering is part of God's plan and his purpose, and he's going to do something amazing through it. If you will simply let him do his work, you will sit back and cheer him on. And that's part of our avoiding the terror of the suffering. And I think when we look at this from the secular side and the deconverted side, it's so nice to say, you know what, suffering is just part of human life, and it just sucks. It really sucks. Some of us are gonna, get in car accidents, get cancer, whatever, and it's inevitable. There's no way around this stuff. And but to say, you know what, I need to grieve. I grieve in advance, knowing some of these things are coming. I grieve when they hit, if I have the chance to grieve. I grieve when they hit other people, like your friend that you talked about. You grieve properly, and you stop trying to make up excuses for why this is or isn't happening, or it's part of a bigger picture, or it's somehow holy and sacred. It's like, no, it just shit happens. It happens. I'm sorry for saying it there, but it happens. And
Yeah.
if we're going to try to make everything into some epic story, we're going to lose the chance to truly just grieve, and to grieve the randomness. Like, you get into a car accident, the one car, everybody gets killed, the other car, everybody walks away.
Right. And I
Why?
think
Why?
that compounds the suffering, and it compounds just the injustice of it when we try to make it fit with our worldview, like in Christianity. Like, that just adds insult upon injury. And I think it can, like, when something like that's so senseless, like a mother losing her child, or something just unexplainable. Why would a child die, get cancer? Why are there are these wars where kids are getting killed and things like that? And I think it's just disgusting, really, that we would even try to say that it happened for a reason, and that there was purpose to it, and that God has a plan. Like, my suffering, or someone else's, or a child's suffering, it's not made better by the fact that God's using it. As a matter of fact, I would argue that if that suffering is just a pawn for God, God's chessboard, it's just compounding how awful and disgusting, it is to think
Yeah.
about.
It's
For
like
the
that's
person
akin.
going through it.
Yeah, and that's
Mhm.
akin to the whole question. I remember somebody mentioned, the whole, having an imagination for the what ifs of theism. Like, what if God is like this? What if there's many gods? What if all the gods are, the other side of the universe? What if there's a God, but you could never ever get to him? And you keep going through all these what ifs. What if the gods are actually aliens that have just been around for 1 trillion years? But what if the God that we think as Yahweh, what if he is more like the God or the devil that we think of as the devil of the Bible? What if God is just a sadistic asshole? And what if
Yeah.
he delights to hurt people? And we're just like, sometimes you just think to yourself, oh, that you see that little kid, whatever, being mean to a bug or something on purpose, or being mean to an animal. You're just like, you know, you don't we don't treat animals that way. But you think maybe God's that God. And I remember, was it The Far Side? There was one I remember where the guy's like got one of those magnifying glass in the sun, and he's like heating up the bug or something on purpose to try to like fry it, just because he's this sadistic little kid. It's like, what if Yahweh's this sadistic little kid? There's so many what ifs, but they would make much more sense of our experience if God is just a sadistic whatever monster
I think it
of
would
our.
be so much more healing too when things like that happen, if we would acknowledge that.
Yeah.
Because I, like, when I got into that college and career group, um leading that with my husband, I was not prepared for the fact that when you're kind of in more of a leadership position, people will kind of come to you and tell you some very heavy things that they're not really willing to open up about to the rest of, like, the group. But you know what I mean. And I won't, like, mention exactly what. It was like an essay situation, child essay situation, where this person was repeatedly Yeah. And that just, she never got to a point where she like understood why God would let that happen to her. So this person was stuck their entire life thinking, I just need to praise God. I'm not going to understand this. Like, if I want to keep my support system, my church family, I just have to pretend that that God is a good God, that would do this to me. Not pretend, but like tell myself or whatever that God is
Yeah.
a good God, even though he would repeatedly let this happen to me. Just that was what she was kind of going through with me. And I was like, I don't have words. Like, I can't sit here and tell you. I've never been through that kind of suffering. I could not sit there and tell her, yeah, God's, this is God's plan, and I'm so sorry. I don't understand how any spiritual leaders can listen to someone telling them something so horrific like that and then turn around and say, but you need to pray to God that he'll make you whole again and he'll heal, and that all this, like, what bullshit though. I'm sorry, but like, and that's what happens, especially like in situations of abuse, sexual abuse, anything, to people in the church. And it's not okay that we gaslight them like that and say that, a good God would let that happen to them just because we can't fit that into our frame of reference, our worldview, that would be possible, so it has to fit in somehow. Like you said, the puzzle piece, we have to make it fit.
Yeah,
And that's
exactly. It's very sick. I totally agree. Can I just mention, Shell, I'm going to wrap us up here in a second, but I do just want to say that I think there's a lot more that we could all share about this, and I've got myself a ton more to share. But I just wanted to say that, when I do bring this topic up, I'm not sure if I'll just bring it up again tomorrow. I'll save it, for a couple of days just to kind of let some things sit and, make it sort of a time for us to, because this is a very intense topic, obviously, but, to let it simmer and I'm not sure I'll think on that. But either way, whenever this comes back up again, if you do feel like, that some of the things we share freshly there, or, you want to jump in again, please do. I really appreciate your perspectives a lot. And if you want, real quick, I'll keep you on for a second while I read a few quick comments, and then I'll say good bye to you, and then I'll wrap up the presentation. But there's a couple interesting comments from Phil Greenwood and Legend Jeff that came in. I'm not going to read them just for the sake of time, but some interesting stuff. I appreciate you talking about that and the Midrashic stories, the Jewish art of retelling ancient stories. But good stuff. Again, for the sake of time, I'll keep those off. But I do want to mention William, who's he's been so kind to be part of our community here, and I love what he has shared with us. But he says, my late wife bought me all the scripture memory song CDs. I used to love learning what I thought was God's word. That way, music really helps it stick. Of course, the scripture memory songs on topics like genocide, SA, slavery, etc., never quite got made. Yeah, they didn't make the songs about Lot and his two daughters. Needless suffering is one of the greatest proofs against an omni-God. Yeah, absolutely. Very well said. And if a deity is truly all good, all knowing, and all powerful, the reality of the world would look significantly different. If God has the power to end unnecessary suffering, but chooses not to, despite knowing it is happening in advance, to proves that God is either apathetic, evil, or non-existent. Yeah, very well said. Very well said. I want to wrap us up on that note. That's a great one. But Shell, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate your insights.
Yeah, thank you so much for having this platform for people to, to dive into these deep topics and to have that safe space to talk about what they suffered through. Because like we just said, in the church, they try to justify it, and here people are able to like say what happened and not have that justified. So I think that's a really important space you're creating there for that.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I appreciate your thoughts on that. So yeah, please jump in on the next one for sure. We'd love to have you back.
All right, you have a good night.
Thanks, Shell. You too. And just to comment on what Shel just said, I think a good way to put that too is to say, when you bring things into the light, they lose their power. When you bring the secrets and the darkness, when you bring the lies and the deception, you bring things into the light, they lose their power. That's why we tell our stories. That's why we expose these things. That's why we talk through them and think through them. That's why we say things like Yahweh's a psychopath. And when you think that he's your hero, then it turns you into a monster, because when you think monstrous thoughts long enough, it turns you into a monster. We try to work through this stuff enough to give ourselves the words and the power and the autonomy and the self-respect that we deserved to think through this from a better perspective. And I do appreciate that you all keep me in line with stuff and help me to understand different perspectives. And I do hope that this does continue to be a a platform where we feel like that light is a great disinfectant. Yeah, absolutely. So thank you all so much. I need to run and check on my kiddos, make sure they're all good and in bed and so forth. They've been in bed for a while, but I've got one that stays up a little bit later. I need to make sure he's good to go. But thank you all so much for being a part of my life. I appreciate it so much. And just to give you one final heads up, I'm going to be doing my live streams at night a little bit at different times. When my kids are with me, it'll be probably like 8 to 10. When they're not with me, it'll be more like 7 to 9 or 6 to 8 or something. But I'll figure out sometimes. But I'm hoping that that also helps make it more convenient for people, maybe late nighters in the UK, some people that wish they could stay up, but it's just too late, whatever. That's just, my schedule allows me to flip it like that sometimes, but I'm hoping it hits a broader audience who maybe be frustrated that I meet late at times with this time frame. So I hope that doesn't upset anybody, that it's going to be kind of hit and miss, but just keep an eye. If you subscribe and you hit the bell, I believe like 30 minutes before I go live or something, it just says Tim's going live in 30 minutes. And that way you don't have to worry, which what day is it and what day, when is he starting? You don't have to worry about it. It just pops up. And if you're available, you're available. But when you are available, I'd love to have you jump in. So with the comments or the open mic. But thank you so much. I really appreciate your kindness. And again, I think we've got a lot more on the suffering. I've got another 10 pages of notes to go through. So I'm sure some of you will want to jump in and to talk some more about your experience. And so please do keep an eye on the topics and the live stream alerts. But thank you all so much. If anyone wants to support this channel, the links are beneath this video. Thanks for being a part of my life, my community. Have a wonderful night. Talk to you soon.